George and the Snore Stone. Chapter 1. The Hero of Naptown. In this peculiar land of Naptown, where the sun shone brightly and the clouds floated lazily, lived a 12-year-old boy named George Snorebottom. George was a bit of an oddity, even for a place where the primary pastime was, quite suspiciously, napping. While the other townsfolk could snooze their way through an earthquake, George was perpetually wide awake, often wondering what on earth was so great about slumber. One sunny morning, George wandered through the cobblestone streets of Naptown, glancing at the different shops with their whimsical signs. Bob's Blanket Emporium promised the fluffiest cushions for the best naps, while Lolly's Dreamy Delights sold sugary treats guaranteed to induce a deep snooze. George chuckled to himself. The only thing he could ever do well was stay awake. As he passed the town square, George spotted a gathering around the fountain. The townsfolk were all nodding off, their heads bobbing like dandelions in the wind. Curious, George approached, but found that the crowd was in a deep dream about a legendary hero who had been prophesied to save Naptown from an impending doom. "Shh," was all he could hear. Suddenly, a loud snort echoed through the square, and a familiar figure stumbled into the light. It was Mayor Snooze-a-lot, the town's beloved leader, known for his remarkable ability to fall asleep anywhere. George waved at him, but Snooze-a-lot was too busy dozing off mid-sentence. "We need a hero to—" "Excuse me, Mayor," George shouted, trying to rouse him. "What kind of hero do you need?" Snooze-a-lot's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at George as if he were trying to remember how to hold a conversation. "Ah, George, the hero we need is a brave soul. A great, He drifted off again, his head tilting dangerously. George sighed. "A great what? A great napper?" Mayor Snooze-a-lot snorted awake once more. "No! A great adventurer to find the magical Snore Stone. It is the only thing that can save Naptown from the sleepy sorceress who plans to wrap the entire town in endless slumber." The townsfolk seemed to shift, waking slightly at the mention of the sleepy sorceress, and let out a collective groan before slipping back into their dreams. George, however, felt a spark of excitement. "I could do it," he declared, startling the mayor. Do what?" Snooze-a-lot mumbled, scratching his head. "Find the Snore Stone," George insisted, his heart racing at the thought of adventure, or at least something to keep him awake. "Well, if you think you can," Snooze-a-lot yawned, clearly struggling to stay conscious. "But remember, it's not just any stone. It's hidden in the dreaming woods, guarded by the most dangerous creatures." George nodded vigorously. "I'll do it. Just point me in the right direction." With that, the townsfolk resumed their naps, while George set off determinedly towards the dreaming woods, his mind buzzing with thoughts of heroic deeds and how to stay awake through them. Chapter 2. Into the Dreaming Woods. The entrance to the Dreaming Woods was flanked by two enormous trees that seemed to sway even without a breeze. George stood before them, heart thumping in his chest. "This is it," he whispered, trying to muster his courage. "The legendary adventure begins." As he stepped into the woods, a peculiar sensation washed over him. The trees whispered secrets, and the ground beneath his feet felt softer, as if inviting him to take a nap instead of forging ahead. "No, no," he chided himself. "Stay awake." Minutes turned into what felt like hours, and George wandered deeper into the woods. Suddenly, he stumbled upon a clearing filled with the most peculiar sights. Floating teacups, dancing spoons, and even a tea kettle that was having a fit of giggles surrounded him. "Welcome, young adventurer," a voice called from above. George looked up to see a rather rotund owl perched on a branch, wearing spectacles and a tiny top hat. "I'm Professor Hootington, keeper of quirks. What brings you to these enchanted woods?" "I'm looking for the Snore Stone to save Naptown from the sleepy sorceress," George explained, trying to sound heroic, despite the oddity of the situation. "Ah, the Snore Stone," Hootington hooted with a twinkle in his eye. "It's a tricky thing. Many have tried to find it, but alas, they all fell asleep before they could succeed." George felt a shiver run down his spine. How do I avoid that? The owl pondered for a moment, adjusting his glasses. You must outwit the guards of the Snorestone. They are known to be quite drowsy themselves. George frowned. How do I outwit drowsy creatures? With a wise nod, Hootington replied, Use what you have. You are an expert at staying awake, yes? Perhaps you can distract them with your energy. But I'm not that great at anything else, George protested, feeling a hint of despair creeping in. Ah, but every hero has their strengths. Remember, it's not always about being the best. Sometimes it's about using what you've got. Hootington winked. George smiled, feeling a bit more confident. Okay, I can do this. Chapter 3. The Drowsy Guardians. As George made his way deeper into the woods, he soon encountered the first of the drowsy guardians, a giant snoring bear named Lullabear. He lay sprawled across a path, his belly rising and falling rhythmically like a gentle wave. Excuse me, George said, tapping the bear's paw. I need to get past you. Lullabear opened one eye slowly, squinting at George with a sleepy frown. Why should I let you pass, little one? He yawned, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Because I'm on a quest to save Naptown, George replied, trying to sound heroic again. And I'm not going to fall asleep like you, Lullabear chuckled softly, but it sounded like a distant rumble. You're brave. I'll give you that. But tell me, what will you do to keep awake if I ask you to sing a song? George's mind raced. He wasn't the best singer, but he could give it a try. Fine, here goes. He took a deep breath and launched into an off-key rendition of The Snooze Blues, a quirky song about the dangers of too much sleep. To his surprise, Lullabear began to giggle, rolling from side to side. That's terrible, he laughed. But it's so funny, you can pass! George grinned and tiptoed past the bear, who continued to chuckle to himself. Maybe this hero thing isn't so bad, he thought. Chapter 4. The Nap Trap. George continued deeper into the woods, feeling increasingly confident. However, he soon stumbled upon a peculiar sight, a giant hammock strung between two trees, swaying gently. He could hear soft cooing sounds coming from it. Curious, he approached, only to find the second drowsy guardian, a plump pigeon named Featherfuzz, snuggled comfortably in the hammock. Oh, hello there, she chirped, her voice drowsy as if she'd just woken up from a nap that lasted a century. What brings you to my cozy spot? I'm on a quest to find the Snorestone, George declared, but I need to get past you first. Featherfuzz fluffed her feathers, yawning widely before replying, And what will you offer me in exchange for passage? George thought quickly. I can tell you a story, a funny one, I promise. Featherfuzz's eyes twinkled with interest. A story, you say? Go on, entertain me. George cleared his throat and began spinning a tale about a clumsy prince and his talking cat, who accidentally turned the entire kingdom into pillows. He made sure to exaggerate the mishaps and add silly voices, which had Featherfuzz laughing heartily. Okay. You've amused me enough, she said, wiping a tear from her eye. You may pass, but remember to visit me again for more stories. With a wave, George hurried past, relishing his small success. I'm getting good at this, he chuckled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Chapter 5. The Sleepy Sorceress. At long last, George reached the heart of the dreaming woods, where a sparkling portal shimmered with magical energy. He could feel the pull of the Snorestone from beyond it, the air thick with anticipation. As he stepped through the portal, he was met by a sight that made him freeze in his tracks. Sitting atop a throne made of pillows was the sleepy sorceress herself. She had a flowing robe that looked suspiciously like a giant blanket, and her hair was an unruly mess of curls. Welcome, little hero, she said, her voice like a soothing lullaby. What brings you here? I'm here for the Snore Stone, George stammered, trying to find his courage. You're not going to put me to sleep, are you? The sorceress chuckled softly. Oh dear child, the Snore stone is the most powerful relic in all of Naptown, but it can only be claimed by one who can stay awake and charm me with wit. George nodded, determination flooding his veins. Well, I'm full of wit and, stories. The sleepy sorceress raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Very well, amuse me, and I may just let you take the stone. George took a deep breath and began to tell the most ridiculous story he could muster about an enchanted blanket that was actually a former king who had been cursed. He described its adventures in search of a good nap, how it had fought against giant pillows, and even how it learned to juggle sleeping bags. The sorceress laughed heartily, clutching her sides as she struggled to keep her eyes open. You're quite the storyteller, she admitted, her eyelids drooping just a little. George seized the moment. And while you're laughing, how about we shake things up? He started dancing in place, making silly faces and flailing his arms wildly, completely oblivious to how silly he looked. The sleepy sorceress burst into fits of giggles, nearly toppling off her throne. Oh my! You've entertained me thoroughly. You may have the Snore stone. With a flick of her wrist, a stone that sparkled like the stars fell into George's hands. And take this, she said, handing him a tiny pillow. It will keep you awake in the toughest of naps. Thank you, George exclaimed, clutching the stone tightly. Just remember, she said with a teasing smile, the next time you find yourself sleepy, give that pillow a squeeze. Chapter 6. A Hero's Welcome. George raced back through the dreaming woods, his heart pounding with excitement. He couldn't wait to show the townsfolk what he had accomplished. As he approached Naptown, he felt a sense of pride swelling within him. When he reached the town square, he found everyone still napping peacefully. He cleared his throat loudly. Hey, everyone! Wake up! I have the Snore stone! Slowly, heads began to rise, sleepy eyes blinking in confusion. Mayor Snooze-a-Lot rubbed his eyes and leaned forward. What's happening? Is it time for a meeting, or... Zzz. I've got the Snore stone, George shouted, brandishing it proudly. And I saved Naptown. The townsfolk began to gather, sleepiness fading as they realized George stood before them, a hero in their midst. George Snorebottom, the hero of Naptown, Mayor Snooze-a-Lot declared, his voice filled with awe. George beamed with pride. All it took was some silly stories and a bit of dancing. From this day forth, let it be known that we shall take our naps with a little more excitement, the mayor proclaimed, and the crowd cheered. As they celebrated, George realized that maybe being a hero wasn't about being the bravest or the strongest. It was about having a good laugh, staying awake in the face of sleepy danger, and finding adventure in the most unexpected places. And from that day on, Naptown had not just a hero, but also a storyteller who could keep their spirits high, even in the laziest of lands. George Snorebottom had found his place, and he wouldn't trade it for any nap in the world.